The 1980s and 1990s were two fantastic decades for science fiction on the big screen. Not only were popular long-running franchise pictures tearing up the big screen, but so were original sci-fi films, both big-budget blockbusters and scrappier low-to-mid-budget movies. While I'm fond of most, if not all of these, for me the best three to come out of this era are a loose trilogy of films which began in 1987, with a movie about a cyborg police officer, which everyone assumed was a piece of low-budget schlock, but would go on to prove it was much more. The story of what would become RoboCop begins in the early 80s with writer Edward Neumeier. At the time, Neumeier was working as a junior story executive at Universal Pictures, though he had aspirations of becoming a screenwriter and movie producer in his own right. After shadowing the crew on Blade Runner, which was filming behind his office, a concept for a movie began forming in his mind. He recalled, "I had this vision of a far distant Blade Runner type world where there was an all-mechanical cop coming to a sense of real human intelligence." While writing an outline for his idea, he encountered director Michael Miner, who had a similar robot-themed movie idea called SuperCop. Over the next few months, the two collaborated on a spec script in their free time. Taking inspiration from Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, Neumeier conceived of killing off the lead character near the beginning of the film. However, this time the character would be rebuilt as a cyborg. Neumeier was also heavily influenced by the corporate culture of the 1980s, which he had an extremely critical view of. He said, "Milton Friedman and the Chicago Boys ransacked the world, enabled by Reagan and the Central Intelligence Agency. So when you have this cop who works for a corporation that insists, 'I own you,' and he still does the right thing, that's the core of the film." To further satirize the Reagan-esque attitudes of the day, Neumeier and Miner came up with the idea of having news breaks throughout the movie, television hosts who would be smiling brightly while reporting on horrific violence and hot new products alike. The spec script was completed by December 1984, entitled RoboCop, The Future of Law Enforcement. The two began shopping the script around in early 1985, eventually catching the eye of director Jonathan Kaplan and producer John Davidson at Orion Pictures. Davidson was a seasoned producer of B-movies and parodies and took to the satire of the script. In a meeting with Miner and Neumeier, he referenced Dirty Harry and Mad Max 2 for the tone he had in mind. When the writers agreed to take on board these notes and write a second draft, the project was given the green light. As Neumeier and Miner began work on the second draft, director Jonathan Kaplan left the project to direct Project X. Miner lobbied to direct the film himself, but Davidson refused, citing his lack of experience. Instead, he was offered the job of second unit director, but Miner turned this down. Directors who were approached to take over included David Cronenberg, Alex Cox, and Monte Hellman. A huge sticking point in finding a director was the film's title. To many, RoboCop sounded like some kind of Roger Corman or Cannon-esque B-movie, and turned away many prospective filmmakers.
Everybody had reservations about the title because the title was just basically silly. And no matter who you told the title to, you could just see it, the expression on their face like, God, why are they involved with such a piece of junk, you know? So we often thought about trying to come up with a better title, but it stuck.
In fact, I remember Orion saying, "We can never sell it with that title. It's stupid. It sounds like a kid's movie." But in the end, a title that tells you what the movie is really quite good.
Eventually, producer Barbara Boyle got wind of the script, and she sent it to Dutch director Paul Verhoeven, whom she had just worked with on Flesh and Blood, Verhoeven's first English-language movie. Verhoeven had made a big splash in his native country with controversial, albeit largely acclaimed films such as Turkish Delight, Spetters, and Soldier of Orange. Allegedly, when he first tried to read the script, he only got through the first page before discarding it out of hand. He was urged to read it again by the producers at Orion Pictures, but again he turned it down. It was only when Verhoeven's wife Martine read it and loved it did he give it a third try.
My wife picked up that script RoboCop and read it, and she said, yeah, this is perhaps not, it's not Shakespeare, but it is a script with more layers than you think.
And he sent us a telegram saying that he would do the picture. And no one was more shocked than I.
After Verhoeven stated his interest, he requested a third draft of the script, desiring a more serious tone. While Miner and Neumeier worked late nights to complete the third draft, they gifted Verhoeven with a number of 2000 AD comic books to better communicate their vision of the film. By the time the third draft was completed, Verhoeven understood the intentions of the movie and admitted the second draft was the better script, and thus he signed on as director. When it came to casting the film, Orion sought out actors with experience in action movies, and having already produced The Terminator, they first suggested Arnold Schwarzenegger. Among others considered were Michael Ironside, Rutger Hauer, Armand Assante, and James Remar. While Verhoeven liked Ironside, the creative team knew they needed someone with a slender body type, because if the actor was too large, they would simply look enormous with the RoboCop suit on. Eventually, Peter Weller expressed his interest, stating a desire to work with Paul Verhoeven. Weller not only had the right physique, but he also had extensive martial arts and athletic training, which would allow him to imbue the RoboCop character with a distinctive movement style. He also had no qualms about his face being covered up for the majority of the film, which was a sticking point with other actors. Weller had already accrued a modest sci-fi fanbase following his appearance in The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai across the 8th dimension. After landing the role, Weller worked closely with mime artist Moni Yakin to perfect the movement style of the character. He developed a way of moving very smoothly, but with an abrupt stop to each movement, which would help sell the character's robotic nature. For the role of Anne Lewis, Stephanie Zimbalist was originally cast, but dropped out due to her obligations to Remington Steele. Nancy Allen was brought in for a last-minute audition, and though she too was put off at first by the film's title, she was incredibly impressed when she eventually read the script. Having appeared in Carrie and I Wanna Hold Your Hand, Allen was known for her curly blonde hair and high school cheerleader-like persona. Thus, the first thing Verhoeven asked her to do was to cut her hair short and dye it dark. To help prepare for the role, she underwent police academy training and received advice from her father, who was a police lieutenant. For the villainous Clarence Boddicker, Michael Ironside was considered and Robert Picardo auditioned, but Kurtwood Smith was the favourite, though he also auditioned for Dick Jones. Like Allen, he was also unsure of how substantive the film would be, but saw that it had potential. Boddicker was given glasses so that Smith would resemble Nazi Party member Heinrich Himmler, which Smith was unaware of at the time. Instead, he saw this as Boddicker's attempt at looking more intelligent, to conceal his true nature as a sadistic psychopath. Up until that point, Kurtwood Smith had mostly led an acclaimed stage acting career, with only guest spots on a handful of TV shows. RoboCop was his first foray into feature films and science fiction. He would later land a leading role in the sitcom That 70s Show, and make further forays into science fiction, making 3 appearances in the Star Trek franchise. During casting, Verhoeven had a tendency to choose actors who were seen as opposite to their roles, and flip their industry reputation. This was successful with Nancy Allen, and the same would be done with Ronny Cox, who at the time was known for playing predominantly nice, approachable, fatherly characters. When he was cast as the heartless OCP corporatist Dick Jones, Cox found that playing a villain was, quote, about a gazillion times more fun than playing the good guys. Star Trek fans will know Ronny Cox for his later appearance in Star Trek The Next Generation's Chain of Command as Captain Edward Jellicoe. Playing Dick Jones's corporate rival Bob Morton would be Miguel Ferrer. Morton would be Ferrer's breakthrough role, and he would go on to become a familiar face to American TV and film audiences, appearing in Hot Shots Part 2 and Twin Peaks among many others. Filming began on the 6th of August 1986 on an $11 million budget, mostly on location in Dallas, Texas, with further filming in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Problems arose almost immediately, specifically surrounding the RoboCop suit. Makeup effects artist Rob Bottin, famous for his outstanding work on John Carpenter's The Thing, was brought in to design the suit. During pre-production, Bottin clashed constantly with Verhoeven, Miner, and Neumeier over the design of the suit, with Verhoeven later admitting his own indecisiveness made the problems worse. Therefore, by the time the suit was actually finished, it was delivered as shooting had already started. Following the initial 11-hour process of putting Peter Weller in the suit, he found all of his preparation was now useless.
Because he said, I can't do it, and I don't know how to walk, and basically, and we said, and the production said, well, I have to shoot, no time. And he said, well, but I didn't get time to practice. And we said, well, that's a pity. We have to shoot anyhow. It was so devastating. It was so frustrating, and we were so insensitive that we didn't understand that that could not be done. It was only later that I realized that we had done something completely inappropriate, and that Peter Weller had all the right of the world to protest. And so ultimately Mike Medavoy said, okay, let's stop a couple of days. And you work with Peter. So we started then to work with the system, with the costume, and we had the video camera, we showed it to him, and slowly he got the confidence and the ability to do it so that it looked good.
This inexperience with makeup, special and visual effects led to many more conflicts, frayed tempers and arguments all throughout principal photography, and the scorching Texas heat only made things worse.
People were just exhausted and ready to kill each other.
People said I looked dead, and I really was white. I mean, it was really hard.
Working on RoboCop was like being the victim of a violent crime. You just try to blank it out of your mind and memory. I swore I'd never make another picture.
Peter Weller allegedly lost 3 pounds of weight per day due to sweat alone, and Verhoeven had to take prescription medication to manage his stress levels. For the crucial scene in which Murphy is gunned down by Boddicker's gang, Rob Bottin created an elaborate animatronic puppet to stand in for Peter Weller. While filming a number of action scenes, the local fire department lodged several complaints with the production due to the size and loudness of several explosions. Many of these explosions were much larger than anticipated, setting fire to surrounding buildings and even singeing some of the actors on more than one occasion. But after a grueling shoot, filming wrapped in late October 1986. For the film's visual effects, the production couldn't afford a major visual effects studio and so hired a small team of individual specialists. ILM veteran Phil Tippett was brought on board for the Ed 209 sequences, which Tippett animated using Go Motion, a version of stop-motion animation which simulated motion blur. Dick Jones's death, however, was animated by Rocco Joffrey, who also handled many of the matte paintings. Peter Curran was responsible for the RoboVision effects. Rather than utilizing the rudimentary CGI of the day, Curran used traditional photography and rotoscoping techniques to create the shots. Even the thermal vision was simply actors in body stockings painted with thermal colors and then shot with a polarized lens. To compose the music of the film, Verhoeven hired Basil Poledouris, who had worked with him on Flesh and Blood. Poledouris scored the film with a simple but effective instrumental language, industrial percussion and synthesizers to signify the mechanical parts of RoboCop, and traditional orchestra to signify the human parts of the character. When it came to the edit, the first cut of the movie came back with a restrictive X rating due to excessive violence, and so cuts were made to achieve an R rating. Verhoeven always maintained the version of the film with more over-the-top violence made the film more absurd, comedic and satirical. This more violent director's cut would later see a release on home video, first on Laserdisc and then on DVD and finally Blu-ray. However, the original theatrical cut of the movie was released on the 17th of July, 1987.
He died a hero.
Target?
And was reborn as RoboCop. A one-man police force with the strength of an army, the speed of a laser, the brain of a computer, and a body made of steel.
Looking for me?
RoboCop, rated R.
As I mentioned in the intro to this video, RoboCop is one of my favourite sci-fi action films from this era, and one of my favourite movies in general. It strikes that perfect balance between being a fun and thrilling action movie and an intelligent satire with some real emotional sincerity. If you want to turn your brain off for some great action, there's plenty of it, but there's also a lot to discuss once you scratch the surface. Although the film didn't have the large budget of some of the other blockbusters at the time, this is still a terrific looking film. While the filming locations couldn't replicate the Blade Runner aesthetic Edward Newmar originally envisioned, the low-tech gritty setting makes RoboCop's world feel very distinctive, almost like this universe is the prequel to a future like Blade Runner. Paul Verhoeven's direction is very clear and precise. The action sequences are captured very well, with the viewer never losing track of the geography of any location, and the editing lends these scenes a lot of energy. Outside of the action scenes, there are some terrific old-school Hollywood-style wonders, striking compositions, and a wonderful sense of pacing. The special and visual effects are also top-notch. Rob Bottin's work is simply incredible throughout, with a greater chance to shine in the director's cut. While stop-motion animation is a technique which instantly dates the movie, Phil Tippett's work on Ed 209 is fantastic. There's so much character imbued in this machine with the smallest of details. The matte painting work is also stunning, with many of the location and set extensions looking virtually seamless. The only weak effect is Dick Jones's death. The arms on the model look way too long, and the close-up on the face shows it clearly isn't Ronnie Cox. Aside from that, however, the effects are strong across the board. Although it was a cheap production, the film feels much larger in scale, because the direction and cinematography lends everything real dramatic weight. The same can be said of Basil Polidiris' score. I feel these days Polidiris gets forgotten about when movie fans discuss great composers of this era, but personally I think Polidiris is comfortably on the same level as Goldsmith, Horner, Silvestri and Williams. His main theme for RoboCop is bombastic and heroic, feeling almost like a superhero theme. The use of synthesizers also gives the score a lot of texture and detail, but it's the string-heavy tracks which are my favourites. The music used for the scene in which RoboCop returns to Murphy's home and has flashes of his previous life is packed with so much raw emotion, which I suppose is a nice segue into discussing the more substantive themes of RoboCop. Honestly, it's difficult to know where to begin, as so much has been said about the movie since its release. The satirization of capitalism and corporate culture is one of the most obvious themes tackled by the movie. The privatization of public services and militarization of the police are topics which continue to feel strikingly relevant today. The news report segments, however, are probably my favourite piece of satire in the film. The way the news anchors casually switch from smiling through fluff stories to reporting on shocking tragedies is darkly funny, but also illustrates how emotionally draining the news can be, especially today thanks to social media feeds. That kind of absurd humour with a point is peppered throughout the movie, and is something even more overt in the director's cut. Paul Verhoeven movies are known for their extreme violence, and the gore in his preferred version of the film is so over the top it ends up being funny.
Somebody want to call a goddamn paramedic?
This is also what makes the villains so entertaining. Kurtwood Smith and Ronnie Cox are clearly having an absolute blast playing these characters. They are just so irredeemably evil without a shred of decency between them. Kurtwood Smith gets so much great dialogue to work with and injects Boddicker with great physical energy. His performance is so humorous that it makes his acts of violence all the more shocking. It's honestly impressive Dick Jones isn't upstaged by Boddicker, but Ronnie Cox comfortably holds his own and is made just as memorable. Peter Weller and Nancy Allen by comparison are much more understated, but just as strong. Lewis honestly should have gotten more screen time in my opinion. Allen handles the action sequences well and instills Lewis with a lot of charm and humour. At the same time, she isn't jaded or cynical in any way and forms a real friendship with Murphy, which feels genuine and earned. We don't get much time with Murphy himself before he's brutally gunned down, but his performance is still very endearing and makes us really care for him as a character before he's killed off. As RoboCop, Weller's physical performance is outstanding. Not a lot of actors can work with just their chin, but Weller succeeds in communicating a wide range of emotions through his body alone. Among the various themes touched on in the story, it's Murphy's personal journey which remains the most fascinating part in my view.
I can feel them. But I can't remember them.
Murphy's death, rebirth, and fight to reclaim his identity can be read in many interesting ways. Firstly, there's the theme of a human being fighting back against the soulless, inhumane attitudes of corporatism. There's also some deliberate Jesus imagery, with Paul Verhoeven even referring to the character as an American Jesus. More recently, however, there have been some compelling feminist and trans readings of the characters which I would highly recommend checking out if you're unfamiliar. Essentially, RoboCop is a movie with layers, and thanks to Verhoeven's direction and Miner and Neumeier's great script, the dialogue, world-building and cinematic grammar of RoboCop remains rich and engrossing well over 30 years later. Knowing about the chaotic and stressful shoot is surprising because the end result feels like a film where everyone was on the same page and gave it their all. It's not only kick-ass, it's also moving, intriguing, provocative, and ultimately very inspiring. Because even after so many rewatches, I never get tired of the explosions, and I never run out of new discoveries whenever I return to RoboCop. While many industry experts balked at such a silly-sounding title as RoboCop, Orion Pictures knew they had a hit on their hands, and to show confidence, held a number of pre-release screenings which began to generate a positive buzz around the film. Upon release, it exceeded box office expectations, debuting at number 1 and remaining in the top 5 even after bigger movies like The Lost Boys and The Living Daylights were released. In the end, RoboCop grossed over $50 million against its $13 million budget. It was a surprise success at the box office, but made its real killing on home video as positive word of mouth continued to spread. Critics also praised the film, finding it to have a far richer narrative than many at first assumed. Despite its violent content, the merchandising of the film proved to be incredibly popular with children, leading to a successful toy line and eventually a TV show. Today, RoboCop is lauded as one of the best science fiction films ever made, with its themes still undergoing re-examination and reappraisal to this day. While it was followed up by 2 sequels and a remake, none were as successful or well regarded as the original. RoboCop 2 and 3 seemed to miss the tone of the first film, either becoming too violent without the satire and humour, or too sanitized without the grit and absurdity. The 2014 remake was widely panned as being a generic action film, lacking the bite of the original. Despite the failed follow-ups, however, none of them have diluted the legacy of the first RoboCop. Thank you for watching. If you like my videos, be sure to like, subscribe and share, and make sure to hit the bell icon to stay up to date with all of my new uploads. If you want to help the channel grow, join my Patreon or YouTube members using the links down below. There you can see videos early as well as some exclusive content. Speaking of which, I'd like to quickly thank all of my patrons and members who are now appearing on screen. Have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.